Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Dear delegates, we last met in an informal session of SBSTA from 17 to 19 and 24 to 26 February this year. Today, I am happy to officially open the formal 24 meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice. I hope that wherever you are, you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic have our sincere and heartfelt condolences. I am aware that a number of countries are slowly opening up, but others are in the midst of another wave. We look forward to the day that life returns to normal and we can all meet in person once again. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all those who we have lost to COVID-19. Then please join me for a moment of silence. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to open and welcome you all to the first of 9 virtual plenary sessions of the 24 meeting of SBSTA. These 9 sessions will take place as follows: today and tomorrow, the 3rd and 4th of May, followed by Sunday, 23rd May to Wednesday, 26th May, and finally Monday, 7 June to Wednesday, 9 June. Note that SBI3 will also meet for plenaries in the 3 blocks between mid-May and mid-June. So we need to synchronize very well. We're very pleased to have with us Dr. Hamdallah Sedan, who will address us on behalf of the COP14 presidency. Dr. Sedan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As the representative of the current president of the Conference of the Parties, Egypt, it is an honor for me to join Ezekiel, the chairman of SBSTA, in welcoming you to the 24th meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice, being held online today and in the coming weeks. I trust that you and your loved ones are well during these difficult times of COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to express my solidarity with you wherever you are in the world. We gather today for the opening of the 24th meeting of SBSTA to discuss very important agenda items covering a number of areas of work of the Convention and its protocols. Progress on all SBSTA topics will allow us to move on developing ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including through advice to the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework scheduled for the 2nd to the 7th of August. I would like to thank SBSTA Chair and all members of the SBSTA Bureau for their leadership in preparing for this meeting. We know that SBSTA 24 has an ambitious agenda, but I am confident that under the guidance from the Subsidiary Chair and the Bureau, it will help to carry forward the work of the Convention and its protocols. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, your expertise and experiences in implementing the Convention in your respective countries to date are invaluable. I trust that these sessions will stimulate open sharing of thoughts and ideas on these various subjects as we advance towards the third meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and ultimately to COP15 on Kunming, China, where we aim to adopt a global biodiversity framework for the post-2020 period. I wish you all fruitful interactions and inspiring discussions. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much, Hamdallah, and also thanks to Her Excellency Yasmin Fuad also for your ongoing efforts in supporting the convention. Now I invite the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, to address the meeting. Elizabeth, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as well as my colleagues. It is indeed my pleasure to join you and be with you today as we begin our 24th meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical and Technological Advice, SBSTTA-24, to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It is my honor to support you along with my team at the Secretariat as we take the steps towards the UN Biodiversity Conference and the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I have already made remarks at the informal session of the SBSTTA held in February, and therefore to save time, my comments today will be brief. Honorable Chair Ezekiel, I would like to first sincerely thank you, and through you, our colleagues in the Bureau, for your excellent leadership in preparing for this exceptional formal online meeting during these difficult times. I would also like to thank our host country, the Government of Canada, for generously providing financial resources that support additional costs incurred for these virtual meetings, including the services of our dedicated team of volunteers. From us all, thanks a million. Distinguished delegates, we have more than 1,560 registered participants representing over 100 countries and many organizations that for this online meeting joining us today. I look forward to all your active participation, and to you all, welcome to this meeting. Dear participants, I hope you all had the chance to attend the information session webinars and the informal sessions of SBSTTA earlier this year, which helped us all to prepare effectively for this meeting. The webinars were very informative and helped set the scene for our discussions. At the informal session of SBSTTA, we heard initial views of parties and observers on most of the agenda items, and we received many valuable and important comments through your statements and written submissions. The Secretariat has collected all of them and will take them into account when supporting the chair of this meeting in developing conference room papers. At this SBSTTA, we have before us 8 substantive agenda items, and these include 1, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework; whereby we invite scientific and technical advice related to updated goals and targets, indicators, and baselines of the draft framework. Under this item, the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook will also be considered. Agenda 2, synthetic biology and risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms, which will inform the need for further guidance to be developed and any adjustments to the process for the identification and prioritization of specific issues of risk assessment established through specific decisions by the last meeting of the parties. Inputs will also inform discussions on the potential benefits and adverse effects of synthetic biology as it relates to the work of the Convention. 3, marine and coastal biodiversity, whereby proposed approaches for the future of the Convention processes on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, or IPSAs, will all be considered. 4, biodiversity and agriculture, whereby the draft Plan of Action 2020-2030 for the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity will be considered. 5th, the program of work of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, whereby proposals for further requests to be considered by the IPBS program of work towards 2030 with a view to supporting the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will also be considered. 6, biodiversity and health, under which progress made in response to the request by the COP15 and the draft Global Plan of Action on Health and Biodiversity will be deliberated upon. And last but certainly not the least, invasive alien species, discussions of which will focus on additional advice provided by the ad hoc technical expert group and through their efforts on broader sectors collaboration on classification and labeling of environmentally hazardous organisms. I extend my sincere gratitude to all our colleagues and partners for their support and contribution to the preparation of documents for all these agenda items. And before I close, I must recognize the Secretariat staff team who have fully dedicated themselves to the successful delivery of these meetings. They have my heartful and heartfelt gratitude. It has been very demanding for my team to ensure that all the preparations were duly completed and seamlessly ready for your deliberations. In return, I will sincerely urge for your apathy and flexibility on your demands to the Secretariat as we do our best to respond to your needs within the existing constraints. I look forward to your interventions over the coming weeks, and with the support of the Secretariat and the guidance of our Substa Chair and the Substa Bureau, this meeting will help us advance the further development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and our preparations for the next conference of the parties. I sincerely wish you all a successful meeting, and we are here to make it a success through the support continued by the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Maruma Mrema, for your introductory remarks. Also, I would like to reiterate my congratulations to you and your team for your hard work in preparing this formal online meeting of Substa. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to item 2, on organizational matters. We last met in February for the informal virtual session of SBSTTA-24. That session contributed to maintaining momentum and to advancing the preparations for the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which has since been scheduled for 11 to 24 October 2021, and the third meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, scheduled to take place from the 2nd to the 7th of August this year. The timing and modalities for the organization of current meeting have been designed keeping in mind the time frame for these upcoming meetings. Given the current extraordinary circumstances brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, they do not set a precedent for the organization of similar CBD meetings in the future. At the informal session in February, we heard interventions on the pre-session documents for 6 out of the 8 items of the agenda of SBSTTA-24, akin to the first reading at a formal meeting of SBSTTA. Participants were encouraged to focus their interventions on comments on the draft recommendations set out in the pre-session documents. There were no negotiations and no formal substantive outcomes or conference room papers stemming from the meeting. It is therefore envisaged that, with the exception of Agenda Item 8, which was not discussed at the informal session in February, in February, due to the lack of time, and Item 9, which was not in the agenda of the informal meeting, the formal first reading of agenda items at this meeting will take into account and build upon the statements and submissions made at the informal meeting of SBSTTA-24 held in February 21, thus reducing the time needed for the first reading. I therefore urge you not to repeat what was already said at the informal meeting. The statements were made in informal sessions of SBSTTA will be taken into account in the preparation of the CRPs and non-papers for the meeting, unless parties, other governments, or observers indicate that new points are to be added to these statements. All parties and observers who took the floor during the informal session are listed in the report of the meeting, available at the link shown on your screen. Nevertheless, all parties maintain the right to take the floor and make statements. Note that it is expected that a conference room paper will be produced and open for discussion for each agenda item. However, no final documents will be considered or adopted. This process will be deferred to a later date at a physical meeting organized back-to-back with a physical meeting of the Working Group on Post-2020 or COP15, unless otherwise decided by the Bureau. For items that are needed to fit into the post-2020 process, as SBSTTA Chair, I will convey the results of the meeting to the co-chairs of the post-2020 process. The standard rules of procedure used for physical meetings will apply, adapting their application as necessary for virtual meetings. I will chair all individual sessions on agenda items, except for item 9 on biodiversity and health, which will be chaired by my colleague on Subsidiary, Ms. Elena Brown from Antigua and Barbuda. Also, my colleagues Marina from Finland and Helena from Antigua and Barbuda from the Bureau may help me in case I face serious issues with the connectivity. Now, before we start our work, I would like to invite the Secretariat to provide some information on the organizational work for this session, as agreed by the Bureau of Substan, followed by some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good time of the day, dear colleagues. As you are here, you have successfully joined the session. But I wish to point out that to join all plenary sessions, you will always need to connect through the Substan homepage on the CBD website by clicking Join or through the meeting calendar. As you have been informed through the scenario note, all statements delivered during this meeting will be recorded, and statements submitted in writing will be posted online, unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. However, we will still monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. All plenary sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, with a 15 minutes break approximately midway through each session. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before start time. As per the informal sessions in February, the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before plenary. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, or other observers will also be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda item from parties will be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of regions or groups and 3 minutes for individual parties. For major groups of stakeholders, each statement is limited to 4 minutes, and for individual non-parties or other observers to 2 minutes as time allows. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. There will be no general, regional, or group statements during the opening session of the meeting. Each agenda item will start with a short introduction of the item by the Secretariat. Regions may provide their statements on each agenda item. The list of all pre-registered participants is available online at the link you can see on your screen. Regarding the use of online system, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication, mainly regarding any need for technical support, and therefore to keep your remarks here short. As time for statements is limited, a clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time. But please, do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Finally, please note that towards mid-session, the chair will announce a 15 minutes break. There is no need to log off during this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat, Sasha. I encourage all parties to focus their interventions on new and additional comments on the draft recommendations set out in the pre-session documents on your agenda items already discussed at the informal meeting to help us advance our work and deliberations in a timely manner and this formal meeting of SBSTTA-24. Dear colleagues, this brings us to the adoption of the agenda and organization of work. The Executive Secretary, in consultation with the Bureau, prepared a draft provisional agenda for this 24 meeting of SBSTA. The provisional agenda of SBSTA-24 is contained in document SBSTA/24/1. The annotations to the provisional agenda are contained in document SBSTA/24/1/F1. I first submit the provisional agenda for adoption. I see no objections, so the agenda is adopted. Regarding the organization of work, the Executive Secretary, in consultation with the Bureau, proposed the allocation of tasks for the meeting as described in the scenario note SBSTA-24/1F2. While we plan to address all agenda items, priority will be on elements directly related to the post-2020 process, agenda item 3, to allow for the timely contribution to co-chairs of the open-ended working group on post-2020 and the third meeting of the working group to develop a high-quality post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Kindly note that item 3 is directly related to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and the work of the third meeting of this group is addressed early in the timeline and will be prioritized as it needs to be complete by the end of May to inform development of the first draft of post-2020 global biodiversity framework and to be ready for the third meeting of this work. SBSTA Bureau also consider organization of the first reading for agenda item 9 on health and biodiversity. As the pre-session document was posted online on April 28, the Bureau decided to defer the first reading to the third session of SBSTTA-24 during 7 to 9 June. This will allow for 6 weeks period between posting the document and its first reading. Specific date and time will be announced later. During this meeting, all sessions will be held in plenary. With this explanation, I submit the organization of work for your approval. I see no objections, so the organization of work is approved. Now, we will proceed to the election of officers. I give the floor to the Secretariat to explain how we will elect Bureau members. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Following the Rule 26, Paragraph 3 of its Rules of Procedure, the Conference of the Parties at its 14th meeting, held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt in November 2018, elected Mr. Ezequiel Benitez Diaz of Mexico as chair of the subsidiary body for a term of office extending until the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. In accordance with the election held at SBSTTA-23, the Bureau of SBSTTA-24 comprises the following members in addition to its chair: Mr. Adams Toussaint St. Lucia, Ms. Helena Jeffrey Brown from Antigua and Barbuda as an alternate for the Nagoya Protocol for St. Lucia, Ms. Marina von Westerbeck, Finland, Alison McMarrow, Australia, recently replaced Ms. Tia Stephens, Mr. Gaute Voigt Hansen, Norway, as alternate for the Nagoya Protocol for Australia, Mr. Larbis Bai, Morocco, Ms. Mary May Mozungali, Seychelles, Mr. Mustafa Fouda, Egypt, as an alternate for the Nagoya Protocol for Morocco, Konchai Fimakong, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Ms. Gwendolyn Sisiwa, Palau, Mr. Volodymyr Damashlinets, Ukraine, Ms. Senka Bogdanovich, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Ms. Tatiana Lipinskaya, Belarus, as an alternate for the Nagoya Protocol for Ukraine and Bosnia and Herzegovina. In order to have staggered terms of office within the Bureau, the subsidiary body will need to elect 4 new members to serve on the Bureau for a term commencing at the end of the 24th meeting. These new members will replace the outgoing members from Finland, Morocco, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and Ukraine. Depending on the outcome of the election, we may have to elect substitutes as necessary for members of the Bureau that are not party to the protocols. Mr. Ezequiel Benitez Diaz will remain on the Bureau as the chair of SBSTTA until the 15th meeting of the COP, when a new chair will be elected. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I would like to invite the members of the Bureau to coordinate with the respective regional groups to nominate new Bureau members. In making your nominations, you may wish to ensure that select candidate has the full support of his or her government an institution to dedicate time and travel to be able to represent your region in the SBSTA Bureau. Furthermore, as SBSTA is being tasked to serve the protocols, it is preferable if nominees to SBSTA Bureau are from a party to all three instruments. I mean, the Convention, the Cartagena Protocol, and the Nagoya Protocol. Alternatively, and as provided for the text of the protocols, if a nominee is from a country that is not a party to one of the protocols, then the region should also nominate a substitute for a country that is party to the protocols. Bearing in mind that this session of the formal SBSTA meeting will not have a closing decision and are not making final decisions, and the new Bureau members are taking office after closing of SBSTA-24, I propose that all regions work internally to provide nominations, and we will come back to this item of elections at the physical meeting when we also consider L documents. But all parties should take the necessary time to find new members between now and then. As this is a formal SBSTA meeting, we need to elect the rapporteur for SBSTA-24 to serve during this online session and the subsequent physical meeting. I would now like to propose the rapporteur of this meeting. After consultation with the Bureau, I propose Ms. Senka Barudanovic of Bosnia and Herzegovina as rapporteur. I see no objections, and I invite Ms. Barudanovic to be the rapporteur for this meeting. Before we go to the next item, I would like to suggest that in order to make efficient use of time and to allow more time for discussions, we refrain for thanking or congratulating the chair, the host country, or the Secretariat in your individual statements. Therefore, I would like to invite the rapporteur to make a statement of thanks on behalf of all the participants so that this can be avoided in individual interventions. Ms. Senka Barudanovic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, this is a statement of thanks on behalf of all participants. On behalf of all participants at this meeting, I take this opportunity to congratulate the chair of subsidiary body and members of the Bureau for their hard work in preparing for SBSTA-24. And I wish you the best success for this meeting. On behalf of all of us, I thank the CIVID Executive Secretary and her team for the high-quality preparations for SBSTA. I have no doubt that our deliberations will be very productive. Thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of all participants.
Thank you very much, Senka, also former chair of SBSTA. Before proceeding to substantive agenda items, it is my role as SBSTA chair to provide you with an update of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science held virtually in April. The joint virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science took place last month, and the main output messages are as follows. The coming decade will be crucial for bending the curve of biodiversity loss and gaining the path towards living in harmony with nature. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework needs to aim for a net gain in the status of biodiversity and nature's contributions to people, nature positive, by 2030, and to reflect systemic challenges. For mainstreaming to be implemented effectively, central attention should be given to nature-based solutions, always framed by ecosystem approaches. It is critical to address the systemic drivers of biodiversity loss by ambitious targets. For example, that actors go beyond limiting biodiversity loss to supporting restoration and moving towards net gain through regenerative practices. Clarity and specification of the outcome goals and targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework are still needed. Principles such as equity and inclusiveness should be emphasized. Net outcomes, including the recognition that some losses are unavoidable in order to meet poverty reduction and food security, while prioritizing avoidance and setting clear limits to counterbalance losses with gains. Biodiversity is not interchangeable to substitutions across ecosystems should be banned. Business in the food system should address the sustainability impacts by strengthening the governance of supply chains, promote sustainable patterns in consumption, improve distribution in producer consumptions, and nurture political for governments, will for governments, business, and civil society. Working on the scaling up successful practices for enhancing biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and benefit sharing should be one of the overarching, although challenging efforts across the Global Biodiversity Framework. Scenarios and models, including the Nature Future Framework, through a holistic and transdisciplinary approach, can play a powerful role designing solutions for transformative change. For instance, large-scale modeling and comprehensive environmental impact assessments exploring the effects of different renewable energy scenarios, pathways on biodiversity will be necessary. Reducing biodiversity loss and zoonotic diseases need to consider the impact and adaptation of climate change. Protected areas and habitat restoration can stop the spread of zoonotic diseases. Investments in nature, including halting land use change, supporting restoration, and making food system nature positive are key to prevent the next pandemic. A culture of data sharing, capacity building, technology transfer, work on education based on good science, and significant increase in resource mobilization towards developing countries are needed to implement and track the Global Biodiversity Framework. Targets and indicators on the framework ought to be considered the issues above. Specific comments on some of the draft targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework are present in information document CBD/SUBSTA/24 if 27 recently posted on the web. With this, we complete the opening session and move now to substantive agenda items. I will now open item 3 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for completion of the first reading. Before we proceed with the statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on 17 and 18 February. At that time, interventions were heard from 48 parties and regional groups, with one additional written submission and 18 observers with 20 additional written submissions. Now, I invite Secretariat to the floor to introduce item 3. Secretariat?
Thank you, Chair. In response to the COP decision that SBSTA should contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to support the work of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, this agenda item covers several important issues related to this general mandate. Specifically, the COP asks SBSTA to consider scientific information and outcomes from relevant IPBES products, the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook, and the 2nd edition of the Local Biodiversity Outlooks. Additionally, the second meeting of the open-ended working group invited SBSTA to provide analysis and guidance on goals, targets, indicators, baselines, and the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. To address these requests, the Secretariat has prepared the following documents: CBD/SBSTA/24/2, the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook and its summary for policymakers, and CBD/SBSTA/24/3, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework scientific and technical information to support the review of the updated goals and targets and related indicators and baselines. Both documents contain draft recommendations for the consideration of SBSTA 24. In addition, document CBD/SBSTA/24/3 has 2 addendum. Document CBD/SBSTA/24/3/add1, which is the proposed indicators and monitoring approach for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which presents a set of criteria and approaches for the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and a draft set of headline, component, and complementary indicators. Please note that the current document includes a correction to the numbering of the component and complementary indicators. As neither the indicator text nor the text of the document were changed, this was not issued in the form of a ref. And document CBD/SBSTA/24/3/add2/rev1 contains the scientific and technical information to support the review of the proposed goals and targets in the updated zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which presents information to support SBSTA's technical and scientific review of the proposed goals and targets in the updated draft for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Please note that this document was released on the 5th of February. It was updated after a technical peer review process, which occurred between February and March 2021. There are also a number of information documents related to this agenda item, which you will find on the screen in front of you. SBSTA 24 will be invited to consider the documents prepared for this agenda item and to provide a recommendation on the GBO/5, the proposed indicators and monitoring approach for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and on scientific and technical elements of the proposed goals and targets of the updated zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Please note that the informal session, the Secretariat received 87 written statements from individual parties, regional groups, and observers. All will be taken into account in addition to interventions made during this formal session in the preparation of the CRP or non-paper for this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. I'd like to make a clarification regarding item 9 on health. That document first reading will be in our session in June, when the 6 weeks period from publishing to first reading take place. This is a clarification to one question. Now going back to item 3, before I open the floor for interventions, in order to increase efficiency and stay with the very limited time we have, I will ask those parties and observers that deliver a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in February or today, will be considered carefully. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, other observers will be heard as time allows. So I look forward for your cooperation in order to allow more speakers to have the opportunity and to finish, hopefully, this agenda item today, to start with further work, which includes the creation of contact groups. Before we begin, I would like to welcome our dedicated interpreters who work so hard to ensure that we understand one another. To assist them in their important work, I ask that you keep your interventions to the time limit while speaking slowly and clearly. I will now open the floor for interventions, starting first with regional groups, followed by parties, then non-parties and observers. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar turns red on your computer, and you may start speaking immediately. If any party encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. I would like to encourage you to limit your statements to new elements of the scientific and technical aspects of the documents with the focus on revised addendum 2. Please be short and concise and focus on essential points you did not already present during the informal session. I will be limiting interventions by parties to 3 minutes, 5 minutes on behalf of regional groups, and 2 minutes for individual statements from non-parties and observers, and 4 minutes on behalf of major groups. If your statements was not already provided in February or before the current meeting in case of new statements, please upload the full text following the instructions provided earlier. Please note, however, that your key points should be read out in the room. As time for statements is limited, a clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Then, interventions by regions. I will take the first intervention from the African region. Then you have the floor. I think it's South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. South Africa is delivering this statement on behalf of the African group. Africa welcomes the extensive work undertaken to develop the documents and recommendations under this agenda item. However, we are deeply concerned with the delay in publishing document CBD SBSTTA-24 Ed 1 Rev 1, which was made available on 23 April 2021 and in one language. This document contains valuable information to inform our deliberations. With regard to the proposed monitoring framework and indicators, Africa supports the recommendation to COP15 to establish a technical expert group with the understanding that the terms of reference will be further deliberated upon in the contact group. However, we feel that between now OEWG3 and COP15, the work on the monitoring indicators needs to be strengthened to avoid the time lags, noting that many years elapsed before indicators for the previous strategic plan were identified, thereby compromising the ability of parties to implement the strategic plan. Therefore, our proposal is to reduce the time lag and allow SBSTA to review and contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in line with paragraph 16, 18, and 19 of Decision 14/34. Africa takes note of the proposed headline indicators and the list of components and complementary indicators. We are of the view that the concept of headline indicators, as presented in document CBD SBSTA-24 3 Addendum 1, is to promote consistency in reporting on progress towards implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework targets. We are, however, concerned that the number of headline indicators is far too high and needs to be substantially reduced to avoid unnecessary burden to parties in their reporting responsibilities, particularly in light of the proposed recommendation for proposing that headline indicators be used by parties in their national reports for reporting on their implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Africa is ready to provide specific recommendations during the contact group on how this could be achieved. Mr. Chair, Africa will prioritize a global biodiversity framework which is transformative to also take into account the current discussions on digital sequencing of genetic resources and address the sharing of benefits arising from it. Therefore, Africa is of the view that digital sequence information is relevant to SBSTA-24 discussions and should not be left solely to OEGW3. Africa is also concerned that in the current structure of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the 20 action targets are not reflecting the 3 objectives of the convention in an equitable and balanced manner. Africa is of the view that this requires urgent attention before the framework can be tabled for adoption. Furthermore, the setting of the baselines should be treated with caution, not to pose an unnecessary burden to developing countries. Chair, despite the fact that connectivity is in Goal A and Targets 1 and 2, there is no suggested deadline indicators for connectivity, not even S1 that needs further development in the proposed indicators and monitoring approach for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework contained in document CBD SBSTA 24.3 and CBD SBSTA 24.3 Addendum 1. This issue may not be solved by a proposed technical expert group because that group will focus on developing indicators for those partial indicators listed and connectivity is not one of them. Furthermore, the technical expert group will only report back to COP16, which could normally take place 2 years after COP15. Far too late to ensure that an indicator for connectivity will be part of the national plans. Africa therefore proposes that a meaningful indicator for connectivity should be in the monitoring framework to be adopted at COP15. We note the suggested recommendations and we have submitted text proposals with the statement that was loaded. I thank you.
Thank you very much, South Africa. On behalf of the African region, your precise comments and recommendations. I hope part of this work can be developed during the contact groups and in order to advise co-chairs on these points when preparing the draft 1 for the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Maldives on behalf of the Asia Pacific region. Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Our statement is a country statement.
Thank you very much. Then I invite you to wait until we finish from all regional statements. I would like to see if there is any other regional statements at this point. I see Argentina On behalf of GRULAC Region Argentina, tiene la palabra Argentina. Adelante.
You have the floor. Please go ahead, Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair.
GRULAC parties. Mr. Chair, we acknowledge the need to move forward in a transparent, fair, and inclusive manner to respond to biodiversity loss, taking into account the specific challenges faced by developing parties regarding virtual modalities for the formal sessions of the subsidiary bodies and their negotiation processes. In this sense, we express the need to take advantage of this opportunity to better understand the different views of parties and observers on the documents and the discussions regarding the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as those of the other agenda items contemplated for the 24th SBSTA session. We consider it necessary to bring balance and strengthen the structure of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, especially with the new circumstances and challenges posed by the pandemic. It must be simple while aiming at to be realistic and actionable, taking into account the particularities and differences in capacities among the developed and developing countries. Likewise, we must build a framework in line with the three objectives of the Convention, ensuring conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and its ecosystem services, as well as fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources, taking into account the latest scientific findings about negative drivers on biodiversity and its ecosystem services. Regarding the monitoring framework and indicators as proposed in SBSTA-24/3-1, the region would like to express concern for its complexity and the real possibility that many parties will not be able to measure the proposed indicators. It must be noted that while we support the need to start discussing the indicators, this technical forum should follow good scientific practices and be mindful when making recommendations related to indicators that we do not yet have a definite idea of the final goals and targets of the GBF. Regarding the scientific and technical information to support the review of the proposed goals and targets in the updated zero draft of the post-2020 GBF, document CBD/SBSTA/24/3-2-Rep1, we are highly concerned about the fact that this document was made available to parties only 1 week before the beginning of SBSTA 24 formal session, and it is not available in all UN languages. Given the importance of this document in order to carry out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets during SBSTA 24, all documents should be available for parties well in advance. We would like to emphasize the need to work on enhanced scientific considerations relating to the ocean and the specific challenges for the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity, as well as the information provided on indigenous peoples and local communities and their important role in effective and meaningful conservation. Engaging IPLCs in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity will also require substantial increase in benefit sharing. In this regard, we believe that AD2 could have provided a more comprehensive analysis on the fundamental role that benefit sharing plays in supporting conservation and sustainable use policies. We acknowledge the need to find and identify gaps of information that the Secretariat will need to fill in order to have a robust scientific document for the post-2020 GBF. As emphasized in past statements in the informal sessions, GRULAC would also like to highlight the importance of capacity building mechanisms, as well as the need to enhance the provision of predictable financial resources, technology transfer, scientific cooperation, and means of implementations by developed countries in line with the principles enshrined in the Rio de Janeiro Declaration on Environmental Development adopted in 1992 and Article 20 of the Convention, as well as from other non-state donors and sources. We should also strive to engage the private sector in our resource mobilization efforts. This is needed to strengthen national monitoring systems and institutions for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Finally, Mr. Chair, our region wishes to express its willingness to actively support the work of SBSTA in order to achieve significant progress in the formal meetings that will allow us to join efforts for the urgent and effective implementation of the Convention of Biological Diversity and its protocols. Thank you very much, and we wish you all the success in this formal session of the subsidiary body. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Argentina, a nombre de la región.
Thank you very much, Argentina, for making this statement on behalf of GRULAC and for the very specific points which you have made in your statement.
I see no more requests from regional interventions. Then I will proceed to interventions from parties. So parties, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. I'll start giving the floor to Maldives, followed by Sweden and Portugal. Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Maldives would like to thank the co-chairs and the Secretariat for the comprehensive documents under this agenda item. As a large ocean country entirely dependent on its ocean and coral reefs, we give the highest priority to protect and conserve our marine resources. Maldives has already pledged to protect 20% of its ocean and is currently developing its marine spatial plan. Like many others, Maldives recognizes the need to protect 30% of the global ocean and would like to see this better reflected in the targets. Maldives would also like to highlight the importance of monitoring and reporting on the effectiveness of the protected areas and would like to see this also reflected in the headline indicators. Maldives welcomes the proposed approach for the monitoring framework and the proposed indicators, including the list of headline, component, and complementary indicators, and recognizes the need to further examine and develop them during the contact group. As a small island developing state, we stress on the need for indicators on marine and coastal biodiversity. And as a coral reef nation, we stress on the importance of coral reef specific reporting. While Maldives has already protected more than 13% of its coral reefs and aim to protect more in the future, we would like to be able to report on this progress with coral reef indicators. We support the inclusion of coral reefs and related indicators in the monitoring framework as proposed by ICRI and others. We specifically note and welcome these indicators in Addendum 2 under Goal A and under Target 1, 2, 6, and 14. We also note the inclusion of indicators on climate regulation services and coastal erosion.
Can you slow down a little bit, please?
Yes. While the draft recommendations explicitly specify the need for support, including financial resources, we would like to emphasize on the importance of this aspect. The resources required to successfully implement the framework and to monitor progress need to be secured. We would also like to highlight the need for technical assistance as well for national, regional, and global biodiversity monitoring systems and in the compilation of biodiversity indicators. We agree that this is crucial for the monitoring framework to be kept under review so that it opens up opportunities for new indicators to be added. Maldives support the establishment of a technical expert group who can advise on the further operationalization of the monitoring framework. In this regard, it is necessary to ensure that this technical expert group has a balanced geographical representation. Finally, we look forward to participating in further discussions regarding this agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Maldives. Portugal, followed by Brazil. Portugal, you have the floor.
Distinguished SBSTA Chair, Portugal maintains the view expressed on this item. I think from our SBSTA would like to make some additional remarks. We are concerned with the fact that the revised Addendum 2 came out less than a week ago, not allowing the necessary time for a thorough analysis. This is a key document to inform the discussion on further development of the post-2020 KBF and its monitoring framework, and this delay may significantly impair the outcome of the contact group that will focus on it. We fear this will have consequences on the quality of the information that SBSTA will convey to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group regarding the preparation of draft 1 of the post-2020 GBF. Moreover, Head 2 does not cover all relevant aspects for the evaluation of the scope, numeric aspects, and level of ambition of the goals and targets. For instance, it does not provide a clear rationale for the metrics used in the suggested goal and target formulation, and it offers no systematic comparison with the ICI targets. Portugal identified some important gaps in the draft Head 2 and made a submission to peer review. We must reaffirm that some of these gaps still persist, namely, first, the fact that a large portion of biodiversity is still unknown, especially in poorly studied ecosystems like the deep sea is disregarded. Second, although some references were added, the marine environment is still under evaluated, particularly the open ocean and the deep sea. Third, the relevance of some managed ecosystem to the conservation of biodiversity, although recognized, is not sufficiently addressed. And fourth, the 2030 milestones are not addressed, and thus the relationship between goals and milestones and between targets and milestones is still not clear. Regarding the draft recommendations, Portugal proposed amendments to the draft recommendation of SBSTA-24/2, recognizing the relevance of the results and conclusions of GBA-05 to the development of the monitoring framework of the post-2020 GBF. We also propose amendments to the draft recommendation of CBD's SBSTA-24/3, mainly regarding the monitoring of progress towards the goals and targets of the post-20 GBF at the global level. Finally, we propose amendments to the terms of reference of the technical expert group Annex 2 /24/3, particularly concerning its mandate and that it should be an ad hoc technical expert group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Portugal. Now I give the floor to Brazil, followed by Japan and Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to take part in today's formal session. Brazil is fully engaged in the negotiations for an ambitious and realistic GBF, one that values biodiversity and the significant ecosystem services it provides in a balanced way. In line with our previous statement presented in the informal session, Brazil would like to express its concern on two major issues that will be discussed under Agenda 3. Baselines and indicators. Firstly, the idea of balance should guide us when choosing the baseline for indicators and designing the monitoring tool. Brazil would like to recall the recommendation adopted in the first meeting of the open-ended working group in August 2019, which established that indicators and baselines should be identified at the same time as targets. In addition, Recommendation SBSTA-23/1 requested the Secretariat to identify the range of relevant existing indicators, baselines, and baseline dates, taking into account the outcomes of the second meeting of the open-ended working group. That being so, we have been surprised by the fact that the document under Item 3 does not provide a comprehensive analysis on possible baseline options for the GBF goals and targets. And some of the scientific justification appears to take the year of 2020 as the agreed baseline. From a scientific and technical perspective, Brazil believes that the pre-industrial period should be the baseline reference for area-based targets. This would allow us to capture the process of ecosystem degradation that is underway for centuries. Using 2020 as a reference period would also place a significant burden on developing countries. Regarding the monitoring framework, Brazil understands it would be premature to recommend the adoption of a global set of indicators at this stage, taking into account that the GBF is still under construction. We should bear in mind that many draft targets present measurability issues that need to be addressed, and we will submit written comments with our amendment proposal. Furthermore, we should consider avoiding any additional reporting burden on developing countries, and we must make clear that the monitoring tool will cover all targets, including targets in capacity building, technology transfer, and on financial resources. Finally, we understand that it will be challenging to discuss document Substa/24/3 at 2 Rev 1, which was only made available 1 week before this formal session. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Now I give the floor to Japan, followed by Sweden. Japan, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks. Overall scientific information is important to encourage various stakeholders to implement post-2020 GBF. In this regard, development of this addendum document is required, and we submitted our comments on it twice in the peer review process. Hence, here we would like to touch upon just a few key points. First, the revised version of the addendum document was not available until just a few days ago, and we could not check the document carefully before today. Thus, we will possibly provide additional comments on the document after careful reading. We also request for more timely preparation of such documents so that we can carefully check and prepare for the discussion in OEWG3. In particular, the number of headline and the component indicators should be minimized to track the progress of each goal and target in national reports of all parties in the same way. For this reason, before OEWG3, the set of the proposed indicators should be revised based on not only the previous peer review process, but also the current Substa discussion. Second, the current addendum document does not fully cover current or reference data of the proposed indicators and relevant components of the post-2020 GBF. If current data of certain metrics are not available, corresponding goals, targets, and indicators of such metrics should be reconsidered. For instance, the current addendum document mentions that there is no available information on monetary benefits shared from utilization of genetic resources. This means that the amount of monetary benefits per se is not suitable as an indicator of goal C. Finally, since the proposed headline indicators include indicators which have been monitored by relevant international organizations, it is important to clarify responsible international institutions, such a list was included in the peer review in last summer, and we ask for update of the list. Ideally, current data and responsible institutions should be shown in the same list together in the monitoring framework. Besides expected roles for each party, which such indicators should be clarified in the suggested recommendation of item 3 of Substa 24 or elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Japan. Just in time. Now I give the floor to Sweden, followed by Colombia. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished Substa Chair, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In addition to the points raised during the informal Substa meeting, Sweden would like to invite the CBD parties to consider the following. Parties were invited by the Open-Ended Working Group 2 to carry out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets and related indicators and baselines under item 3 at Substa 24. Even under time pressure and these extraordinary circumstances, we should do our best to fulfill this mandate. The revised document @2 provides valuable background information for a scientific and technical review of the draft goals and targets, and is helpful to explain why a certain scope, set of components, quantitative elements, ambition level would contribute to the 2050 vision. However, @2 is limited to the scope of the updated zero draft and therefore fails to analyze if the proposed goals and targets are fully aligned with the CBD objectives and if the goal and target components address the relevant challenges for biodiversity in a meaningful way. The @2 document also fails to analyze the ambition level of the framework in relation to the Aichi targets and the actions required to meet the 2050 vision. Finally, it fails to assess whether IPBES and GBO5 recommendations are fully reflected to put us on the path towards transformative change. Sweden is of the opinion that we need to discuss the scientific aspects of each suggested goal and target, with the aim to ensure they contain the necessary components and express a sufficient level of ambition to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity. We need to ensure that direct and indirect drivers identified by IPBES and the relevant actors are addressed, that the anticipated actions are likely to lead to the transitions described by GBO5. Targets must be commensurate with the envisaged 2030 milestones, and these in turn need to be consistent with reaching our agreed vision. The steps towards 2050 need to be logical, consistent, and comparable. Sweden is prepared to work in the contact group to produce clear messages to the open-ended group co-chairs on how to improve the zero draft based on @2 ref and other scientific sources. Sweden will submit a detailed elaboration of the points made above together with the statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sweden. Ahora doy la palabra a la delegación de Colombia.
I will give the floor to the Colombian delegation. Colombia, you have the floor.
Recognizes the importance and urgency of an effective monitoring framework for the GBF with clear and action-oriented goals and targets. In general, we agree with the proposed approach for the monitoring framework, especially regarding the adoption of headline indicators for all parties to report progress on the GBF. We have several comments on the proposed indicators, which we will present at the contact group. Further work is needed on the identification of headline indicators covering all the components of biodiversity, and which are both suitable and measurable by all parties. Therefore, we support the establishment of a technical expert group to advise on the further operationalization of the monitoring framework, which should include experts in monitoring freshwater and marine and coastal ecosystems, which are underrepresented issues in the overall monitoring framework. Headline indicators should be mandatory for all parties under national reports, and component and complementary indicators should remain flexible for the use of parties when relevant. The relevance of headline indicators should be determined by their ability to measure progress in the desired actions and impacts, in particular by their ability to show causality with the drivers, rather than by their mediatic impact. It's evident that the present monitoring framework will impose on parties additional reporting burdens. Clear and predictable mechanisms must be established to support parties in building capacity for their official monitoring systems. A request to support parties in compiling and using headline indicators is a concern that deserves further development in the draft recommendation, taking into account the important implications of the proposed monitoring approach for developing countries. It's key that SBSTTA delivers on carrying out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets. Colombia has actively participated in the peer review of the document SBSTTA-24/3/2. We reaffirm our commitment with the negotiation process through a virtual format, as well as our support to the work of the SBSTTA and SBI chairs, the OEWG co-chairs, and the Secretariat. However, we're concerned about receiving an updated version of Addendum 2 only 1 week before starting the formal sessions. We believe this is not a good practice, nor a good precedent to replicate for the OEWG3 preparations or in the run-up to COP15. We kindly request the working documents to be uploaded with enough time to review them in detail. Finally, we will send our comments to the draft recommendation in writing to the Secretariat. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Colombia.
Thank you very much, Colombia.
To remind you that we are on a very tight schedule and that our time together is limited. My colleagues on the Bureau and I urge you, those parties and observers that deliver a statement on this item at the informal session, to take the floor only if you wish to add something to your previous intervention. Furthermore, there is no need to take the floor to refer to your previous intervention. I assure you that your statements, whether made in February or today, will be considered carefully. I still see a long list of requests to the floor from parties, and in order to allow some observers to take the floor, I invite you to consider what I just mentioned. So by now, let's take a 15 minutes break to continue with the following countries to be prepared: Indonesia, Canada, Malaysia, and Norway. So let's have a break of 15 minutes for a good cup of coffee or tea or whatever you want. See you in 15 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Let's continue with our session for today. As I said, I have on my list of speakers Indonesia, followed by Canada, Malaysia, and Norway. So, Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indonesia would like to acknowledge the Secretariat for the outstanding organization of SBSTTA-24 session amid all limitation and challenge due to the pandemic. Indonesia also extends appreciation to ACTEC regional group and all parties who have done their utmost to prepare and analyze the post-2020 GBF document. This document is crucial to give guidelines for us to protect our biodiversity from disaster and prevent future biodiversity loss, as stated in IPBES Global Assessment Report, as well as utilize it sustainably. As we are facing a very serious crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, where our focus shifted to health and survival, then the progress on biodiversity effort is affected. Therefore, Indonesia sees that the ambitious proposed indicator as necessary. On the other hand, Indonesia calls for all parties to also project the whole issue in pragmatic and realistic way. We need the implementation phase to run smoothly for all member countries, for everyone. Indonesia is hopeful that this global pandemic will be managed thoroughly soon. Then it will be a good starting point for us to recover and revive economic and development process. Without economic and social stability, it will be very difficult to implement our biodiversity commitment. Experts state that economic stability post-COVID-19 will take about 2 to 3 years. Thus, Indonesia offers suggestions as follows. First, the setting point for all indicators and targets currently on discussion and to be decided later in COP15 should be open for further analysis. Second, we have to anticipate the possibility to achieve only a minimum target post-pandemic. Please bear in mind that these suggestions are not to waive our existing hard work, nor to avoid our responsibility on global biodiversity. We feel that this might be a realistic projection to achieve the implementation of our commitment. We want to make this document doable. Then we can evaluate and further progress on SBSTTA-25 and COP16. Indonesia's input on Item 3 documents will be submitted separately to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. Now I give the floor to Canada, followed by Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this agenda item, given that Canada has provided substantive verbal and written comments at the informal SBSTTA-24 meeting in February on the main document and on Addendum 1, we would like to focus our attention here on the treatment of the newly revised Add 2 document, which we did not comment on during the informal meeting. But I promise you I'll be quick. This document relates to an element which is extremely important to us, the scientific and technical review of the draft goals and targets by SBSTTA, so that the co-chairs can have the scientific and technical advice needed to make important decisions to their updated zero draft. Completing this critical task will not be easy, given the limited time we have had to digest this revised document and the limited time that has been allocated during these meetings. We think that this would involve a much more substantive analysis of the scientific and technical information available across all of the goals and targets, and a more critical scientific and technical assessment of what has been presented in the updated zero draft. As a result, we think we need to focus first on what we want to achieve under this agenda item with the limited time we have. For Canada, first and foremost, we want to focus on making progress on the monitoring framework and the indicators, so that at OEWG3 we can have robust, detailed discussions about each of the targets and their respective indicators together. To accomplish this, we think that we will necessarily have to be realistic about Addendum 2 and the scientific and technical review. Our delegation, for instance, has not been able yet to complete its review of the document, and will likely only arrive at the contact group scheduled for later this week with initial views. We believe that our time would therefore be best spent perhaps making some focused adjustments to the document and forwarding this to the co-chairs as information. As always, though, Canada is willing to work together with all other parties to make progress on all agenda items. But at this point, we feel that our best course of action is to focus on the main document and add one, and to forward Addendum 2 to the co-chairs as information for their consideration as they develop a new draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Canada, for your comments about the situation on Addendum 2. Let me tell you that in general, Addendum 2 is based on the previous document that was posted many weeks ago and actually was improved in some points, but the structure and the spirit remain the same, with more information that we received, well, Secretariat received from the peer review process. So in that sense, I believe it's a very good piece of advice for co-chairs, as Canada mentioned, and we will see at the contact groups how best we can deal with that piece of good advice. If there's any additional can be included, and to move and concentrate also in the other requests for SBSTA, which is focused on the monitoring framework, and the basis will be on Addendum 1. But thank you so much. Now I give the floor to Malaysia, followed by Norway and Korea. Malaysia, you have the floor. Malaysia. If Malaysia, okay, go ahead. We cannot hear you, Malaysia. Maybe we can try later. Meanwhile, I'll give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Chair. We need to create a strong, future-proof implementation structure for the post-2020 framework that is ready to be rolled out when the new goals and targets are adopted. Effective participation from Indigenous peoples and other relevant stakeholders is crucial. Agreeing on a candidate set of headline indicators that are well-defined, scalable, and fit for purpose to be used by all parties in their national reports, as well as in global assessments on progress of the GBF, should be our #1 priority. We expect the contact groups to allocate time for discussion on this. We acknowledge that time constraints during SBSTA-24 will prevent us from covering all the details of the draft monitoring framework, which we perceive as a work in progress all the way to COP15. We therefore suggest that a new peer review process is initiated after SBSTA-24 to ensure needed progress leading up to COP15. We welcome the establishment of a technical expert group at COP15. Regarding the terms of reference, we believe this group, as a first step, should have a specific intersessional mandate from COP15 to COP16 to consider remaining issues, for instance, on component and complementary indicators, and on anchoring the monitoring framework both in national processes and in international coordination. We should be especially mindful that expertise on Indigenous peoples' issues are included, and also suggest to invite IPAS to nominate an expert to the group. SBSTA is to provide scientific and technical advice to the post-2020 process. The revised Add To document clearly spelled out areas where there are gaps in the proposed goals and targets compared with the scientific guidance from IPBES and GBO. These are some approaches that should guide a more critical assessment of what is presented in the updated Zero draft, both in terms of how it takes the full scale of available science and technical information into account, and how the language of the targets and goals so far often does not correspond with the proposed indicators. We look forward to discussing this in contact groups. Norway considers conservation as an important element of ecosystem-based sustainable management. Last week, Norway joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People and the Global Ocean Alliance and commits to a global goal of 30% protection of the planet. Norway emphasizes the importance of quality aspects of the proposed 30% target, the protection of areas that are important for biodiversity and a variety of habitats and ecosystems, sound management, and the development of well-connected system of protected areas. We will submit our text changes in a written format. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norway. Let's try again with Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, Malaysia appreciates the work of the CBD Secretariat for facilitating the commencement of SBSTTA-24 and SBI-3 despite the challenging times we are in. Our heart also goes out to all parties affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Malaysia welcomes the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework document and agrees that it should be a basis to guide parties in conserving biodiversity towards 2030 and 2050. If the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature to be achieved, Malaysia calls for an ambitious but implementable post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. But the targets and indicators need to be realistic, taking into account not only national, but subnational and local circumstances. However, Malaysia has strong reservation for the zero draft in its current version. We feel many metrics specified in the targets and indicators do not match the aspirations of the parties. Malaysia supports a realistic framework with headline indicators that allow for consistency with additional supplementary indicators that are flexible for parties. Malaysia also supports targets that are quantitative, time-bound, and comparative across several jurisdictions with 2020 as a baseline year. Distinguished delegates, as many technical experts here may already know, monitoring is a resource-intensive process involving data collection, analysis, and reporting. Hence, it is Malaysia's position for the post-2020 GBF to be supported and upheld by guidance documents, technical assistance, and adequate financial resources from the Secretariat and developed countries. Malaysia would also like to highlight the need for key components of biodiversity, as agreed upon in previous COP meetings, to be inserted into the post-2020 GBF, including digital sequence information, DSI, pollination, and urban biodiversity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Korea, followed by Mexico and Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Republic of Korea supports scientific and technical advice on goals, targets, and indicators of post-2020 GBF and proposes the following for more effective implementation of the post-2020 GBF. First, it is desirable to select one comprehensive headline indicator for each goal and targets. These indicators should reflect goals and targets well, and also should be easy to measure and monitor for making them available to many parties. Second, goals, targets, and indicators must be presented in a balanced manner. The presented indicators are focused on goals and targets related to reducing threat to biodiversity, but a few indicators are suggested for the goals and targets for meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. For maintaining a balance of indicators between goal and targets, SBSTA needs to develop or suggest additional indicators. In addition, indicators which are currently difficult in quantitative assessment and establishment of reference point should be excluded from the list of indicators. Third, consideration of both the global and national level of implementation assessment is necessary in selecting indicators for each goal and target. Korea agrees that all parties mandatorily will use headline indicators in MBSAP for a global assessment of all goals and targets. However, due to the lack of data and knowledge, some countries instead need to use the supplementary indicators. For this, SBSTA needs to provide sufficient explanation on the relationship between the supplementary indicators and the headline indicators. But there is insufficient explanation on the relationship. As a result, additional work is necessary to clarify this. Fourth, it is necessary to present the same baseline and reference period for each indicator based on available data, scientific knowledge, and technology for effective implementation assessment of goals and targets. Finally, the document of SBSTA/24/3 Add 2 well describes the scientific background of goals and targets and the relationship between them based on the currently available scientific funds. However, due to the lack of data and knowledge and these gaps between developed and developing countries, it is difficult at present to determine the specific quantitative level of some goals and targets, such as invasive alien species and human-wildlife conflicts. The Republic of Korea believes that SBSTA will need to work for providing more detailed and direct scientific evidences for such targets and goals. Korea hopes that SBSTA will be able to solve such issues through further works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Korea. Now, ahora doy la palabra a México.
I'm now going to give the floor to Mexico, and then Iran, and then Spain. You have the floor, Mexico. Thank you, Chair. Our delegation is taking the floor to make some suggestions on how to conduct the negotiations on the document CBD/SBSTA/24/3 Add 1 and 2. Firstly, given our limited time to review each item in the contact groups, we suggest that we should focus on discussing and agreeing on the headline indicators, and in particular to propose solutions for those indicators that have not yet been developed. We wish to recall that out of the 41 headline indicators proposed in the monitoring framework, there are 18 that still need to be built, in particular for goals B and D, as well as 6 out of the 20 targets. Secondly, as regards the document mentioned, Addendum 2, we believe that there are certain topics that could be further strengthened. Thus, we suggest that to optimize our limited time for discussion, we should focus on identifying missing topics or those that need to be reinforced so that the Secretariat can fully develop them and make them available at the OEWG 3/COP15. We wish to underline that given that both documents are being built out on the basis of a global framework whose goals and targets have not yet been adopted, they will thus need to be reviewed again immediately after adoption of the framework to ensure consistency with this framework. We have specific suggestions to make to the draft recommendation that we will send to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Chair.
Gracias, México.
Thank you very much to Mexico. And now I'm going to give the floor to Iran, followed by Spain, and then the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iran.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Biodiversity and its conservation for sustainable use is a highly important issue for Islamic Republic of Iran. A national focal point on biodiversity via establishing a nationwide range network in collaboration with public and private sector as well as university research institute try to maximize the implementation of the convention. I would like to join to previous parties and states that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework document is very important and crucial document. We are fully aware of the importance of biodiversity and nature for our better life as well as its importance for the future generation. We believe most identified targets such as 50% land and sea area under spatial planning, increase the percentage of protected area, or monitoring, control and implementation, 50% reduction of invasive species, pollution reduction, capacity building, activity and increased contribution to climate change are not fully achievable and necessary to consider the parties' capability. Furthermore, it is necessary to consider the percentage of its implementation at previous adopted targets. We are most concerned to see the reality and to adopt achievable targets by appropriate relevant measurable indicators. Therefore, we need to discuss scientifically all indicators, targets, as well as all INF documents. We support the establishment of the expert group and believe capacity building, resource mobilization, and access benefit sharing are the key elements, especially in development countries. At present, Mr. Chairman, condition for my country, one of the most important targets on beneficial of the biodiversity conservation is to increase the percentage of financial resources from international and national resources, public and private expenditure to conserve and sustainable use of biodiversity in ecosystems. Mr. Chair, it is more than 5 years now that Iran is suffering from international economic sanction, unilateral, and all Iranian income from export of oil, gas, and non-petrol material is blocked in Western country. Unfortunately, even worse that the financial support approved by diversity-related project, which is financial supported by JEF, are blocked too. My question is, Mr. Chairman, how we are able to save for unique biodiversity and implementation the proposed target and even increase its percentage by 2030 without the resource availability and technology transfer. Finally, Mr. Chairman, my request is to take note for Iran's comments and request CBD Secretariat in negotiation with JEF Secretariat at least withdraw the financial sanction for approved funds in JEF project for Islamic Republic of Iran. That will be great, helpful and beneficial for the conservation of unique biodiversity resources. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Iran. Ahora doy la palabra a
I will now give the floor to Spain, then Congo, and then Jordan. Thank you very much, dear Chair. Colleagues, As regards the statement made by Spain during the preparatory informal session of SBSTA, we have the following additional comments to make. First of all, the post-2020 draft monitoring framework, we believe that the components included therein should form part of the actual post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Coming on now to the headline indicators, we think that for each goal and each target, there should be at least one headline indicator for monitoring purposes, and the initial number of 40 proposed indicators needs to be reduced. As regards the topics identified in the list of indicators in the draft monitoring framework that need to be beefed up, we should add inter alia urban biodiversity, climate change as a driver of biodiversity loss, the potential risks related to zoonoses, the circular economy, nature and culture, or biodiversity in built-up areas. Finally, we are in favour of the proposed new post-2020 global plant conservation strategy, which is contained in the INF 20 document and its future contribution to the global biodiversity framework. We have sent in writing to Secretariat our proposed amendments to the SBSTA recommendations on the post-2020 framework and also on GBO5. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Spain, and thank you for being so brief and concise. So now the Congo, and then Jordan and Switzerland. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. We firstly support the statement made by South Africa on behalf of the African Group. Mr. Chair, our comments and proposals relate principally to the draft recommendation. With respect to the SBSTA recommendations, it is important to keep the draft recommendation brief and concise. We believe that the monitoring framework is an important part of the global biodiversity framework, and that SBSTA should reapprove or endorse the monitoring framework as a whole, and not just in accordance with the proposed approach. In the second paragraph, the sound has disappeared. Once again, the sound has disappeared.
Seems we lost Congo. While Congo connects back again, meanwhile, I give the floor to Jordan, followed by Switzerland. Jordan, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We understand the importance of unifying efforts for the sake of preserving biodiversity and the frame past 2020. As a result of what we've done in Jordan, and we have declared a sea protectorate, we understand the importance of protecting the habitats and preserving at least 30% of oceans as natural protected areas. This percentage is the only solution to maintain the marine and coastal sustainability, as well as the coral reefs. Goal A and Goal 2 and Goal 6, protecting habitats and the effective management of the protected areas is the only way to preserve biodiversity, especially in specifically protected areas that have to be administered by local communities in a safe way. This would be helpful to have it in the submitted proposal. Mr. Chair, in general, we would like to reconsider the proposed indicators. Some of them need further clarification in terms of the mechanisms of their measurement. Others have to be reviewed and perhaps coordinated in order to facilitate the implementation in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is what we would like to add to our previous intervention last February. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I would like to see if Congo is back. If Congo would like to raise your hand so we can give you the floor. Congo? If not, meanwhile, I give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Costa Rica. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, Switzerland refers to its statement made at the informal SBSTTA-24 meeting and would like to highlight the following points. Switzerland considers it important that the headline indicators are adopted at CBD COP15 at the same time as the goals and targets of the post-2020 framework. As time is limited at SBSTTA-24, we should put a focus on headline indicators when discussing the monitoring framework under this agenda item. Regarding the draft recommendations of document 24/3, Switzerland is of the view that the monitoring framework is an integral part of the post-2020 framework and falls clearly under the mandate of the open-ended working group. As a result, SBSTTA-24 should adopt its draft recommendations on the monitoring framework for the consideration of the open-ended working group. An appropriate monitoring framework is a prerequisite for an accurate reporting by parties on the implementation of the post-2020 framework. Therefore, the Secretariat should facilitate the use of an online tool like the data reporting tool DART to support an integrated reporting from parties under the post-2020 framework. Mr. Chair, as unfortunately it is unlikely to agree besides the headline indicators on all the details of the monitoring framework, Switzerland is of the view that the technical expert group can contribute to establish a solid monitoring framework and to help building new experience while supporting the implementation of the indicators. The expert group should get a time-bound mandate to present its work at the SBSTTA preceding CBD COP16 and focus its work on goals and targets where there is a lack of relevant established indicators. Regarding its composition, we suggest to include a representative of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, to include the main global biodiversity database in the discussion. The terms of reference should be amended accordingly. Regarding document Add 2 Ref 1, Switzerland has submitted detailed comments during the peer review process for the document on, for example, the relationship between the goals and targets and on requests for addressing gaps in the scientific information provided for each of the goals and targets. We take note that a revised version of the document was only published by the end of last week, and we will make further comments in this regard after careful analysis as necessary. Switzerland looks forward to the discussions under this agenda item and will submit detailed proposed changes to the relevant meeting documents in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. Now, let's try again with Congo to see if it's able to connect and to finish your statement. Please go ahead, Congo.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to support the statement made by South Africa on behalf of the African Group. Our recommendations and proposals will relate principally to the draft recommendation. With respect to the SBSTTA recommendations, we believe that it is important to keep it concise and brief. We also believe that the monitoring framework is an important part of the global biodiversity framework and that SBSTA should approve the whole monitoring framework and not just as per the proposed approach. In the second paragraph, there's a mention of headline indicators. We believe that the reference should be made, and I am referring to SBSTA 24/3/add1. The proper reference should be made to that document. In the fourth paragraph, we propose that the proposed text now contain, before submitting to the third meeting of the WG 2020 for its consideration. We would also like the text following advice to be deleted. We propose that the Executive Secretary update the monitoring framework based on the comments made by SBSTA. In this way, there would not be any additional taskings for SBI3 and the co-chairs. In the sixth paragraph, we propose that the WG 2020 be the body to submit the recommendation on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to COP. Regarding the recommendations to be submitted to COP, in the first paragraph, the monitoring framework is part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and therefore, COP is to adopt the global framework in its entirety and not piecemeal. In the second paragraph, regarding the reference period, we propose 2018 to 2020 as the timeline to be used, as it was during this time that the parties finalized their sixth reports. The data contained in the sixth reports can be considered baseline data. In addition, it is unnecessary to have a decision on the reference period, given that the reference period will already be mentioned in the monitoring framework. We also propose adding to the fourth paragraph the following wording: consistent with their priorities and national circumstances. The parties must, in effect, have the human, technical, and financial resources required to assess the headline indicators. Our detailed proposals will be submitted, in fact, have been submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Congo. Ahora doy la palabra a...
Thank you, Congo. So now it's Costa Rica, followed by United Kingdom. Thank you very much, Chair. As regards the task set for us by the post-2020 OEWG to carry out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets and the proposed indicators and monitoring approach, Costa Rica would like to make the following comments. On SBSTA 24/03/add2 Rev 1, we consider the following. First of all, the scientific information provided to support Target 2 is not sufficient. We believe that there is plenty of information that supports the urgent need to protect at least 30% of the planet, both land and sea areas, and also the benefits that this protection represents should be included. We believe that there is an absence of scientific information, especially as regards the ocean in this document, and specifically in relation to Target 2. The ocean should always be adequately considered in CBD documents. It should be given a prominent role in the post-2020 framework. We have made a submission in writing that contains different elements that could be added. The document does not correctly reflect Target 2's contribution to achieve Goal A. We need to provide more scientific information that supports the impact of this target on Goal A. We have sent an exhaustive list of information to the Secretariat so that it can be included in the documents. Costa Rica insists that information provided by IPLCs be included in this recommendation. In spite of the reference to fair and effective management, no information is provided on IPLCs, nor the vital role that they play in effective and significant conservation, as highlighted in the SBSTTA report. That is why we think that it's necessary to include more information on this aspect and the links between the role of Indigenous peoples and the actions and the questions dealt with in other targets, such as Target 4 and 7. We think that it's fundamental to mention the key role played by Indigenous peoples and local communities in achieving biodiversity outcomes. We have sent more details to the Secretariat in a timely manner, and we'd be happy to send them again to be put in the records of this meeting. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Costa Rica.
In order to finish with parties and hopefully to give the floor also to some observers. Now I give the floor to the UK, followed by Morocco and Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, regarding the draft monitoring framework, as highlighted in our intervention at the informal SBSTTA-24 session, the proposal for headline indicators to be implemented consistently at both national and global scales is not technically feasible. This list could be streamlined by clustering the targets under the 4 goals and choosing 3 or 4 headline indicators for each of these clusters.
The microphone is too close to your mouth. Can you maybe leave some space? Thank you.
In the contact group, we will offer proposals for some alternative headline indicators. In our view, headline indicators are only one part of the monitoring framework. Component and complementary indicators are also important for tracking progress at global and national levels. But there needs to be flexibility to use these or other indicators as appropriate at the national level. The revised AD2 document is welcome in setting out a breadth of evidence. In particular, we note the scientific evidence in AD2, which highlights the need to protect at least 30% of the land and of the ocean globally by 2030. However, in many places, AD2 does not provide all the details needed to inform the setting of smart targets. We also note some gaps, including around the marine environment and vulnerable ecosystems, and the importance of climate resilience for nature and people. We look forward to working with delegations over the coming days to make best use of the evidence available and address gaps if possible. We suggest that a useful format for the Chair's note would be a tabulation of the possible elements for goals and targets with a range of potential target values or states, covering more and less ambitious options and cross-referencing to indicators that could be used for monitoring purposes. We believe this would give the co-chairs and the open-ended working group a good basis for formulating evidence-based targets without going beyond the mandate of SBSTTA in setting target values. We have submitted our statement in writing. This will also include our proposal for a draft recommendation that welcomes the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. Now I give the floor to Morocco, followed by Argentina and the EU. Go ahead, Morocco.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Morocco fully supports the statement made on behalf of the African group and would like, for the record, to emphatically reiterate, as well as briefly reiterate at this plenary, the essence of the highlights of its intervention at the informal SBSTTA session. And we would like to add 2 or 3 elements as well. And all of this can be summarized as follows. Morocco expresses its complete satisfaction with the approach proposed for the monitoring framework of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to contain clear goals, precise targets, and available indicators that are easy for the countries to monitor, Secondly, Morocco calls for capacity building and sufficient funding for the required development of data systems and to draw up a summary for policymakers under the global framework. Thirdly, Morocco recommends that a list of component and detailed indicators form a flexible framework that the parties can adapt to their context and use in their national reports. Morocco suggests that a limited list of key indicators be adopted. The list should cover the goals and targets of the global framework and should be annexed to the decision to be adopted by COP15. Morocco notes that the indicators for certain goals and targets of the global framework are as yet insufficiently backed with data and/or baseline levels. Morocco proposes that SBSTA be mandated, as one of the speakers has already mentioned, that SBSTA be mandated to work on the list of complementary indicators in the annex and on the filling of gaps during the intersessional period. Morocco proposes the inclusion of a summary for policymakers under the post-2020 global framework and welcomes the analytical summary of the Global Biodiversity Outlook. Finally, Mr. Chair, Morocco calls upon the parties to strengthen and to communicate the close linkages and interdependencies between the implementation of the objectives in the areas of nature conservation, climate change, and sustainable development. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Morocco. Now,
Thank you, Morocco.
Argentina.
I will now give the floor to Argentina and then the European Union. Argentina, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Argentina reiterates its comments made in February and thanks you for the opportunity to make additional comments under this agenda item. On document CBD SBSTA-24/2, Argentina takes note of the conclusions of the 5th GBO. On this, we wish to highlight the information that comes from the most recent national report submitted by the parties and will be sending in writing suggested changes to the draft recommendation in paragraph 3 on GBO5's conclusions that need to be highlighted, and also in paragraph 4 as regards consideration of this report in the 3rd working group meeting. Turning now to document CBD/SBSTA/24/3, we agree with the points raised by GRULAC, requesting that this subsidiary body follow good scientific practices and restrict ourselves to making recommendations on indicators until the goals and targets of the global framework have been adopted. Also, even although we will participate by making suggestions on baselines, adjustments and new indicators, which have not been developed very much, we repeat that this constructive participation does not in any way constitute Argentina's acceptance of the goals and targets presented in this updated draft. Thus, we will send in proposed changes to draft recommendations in its paragraphs 1, 5 and 5A, and also in the draft COP decision paragraphs 1, 2, 4, 7, 9 and 11, as well as many headline indicators found in Annex 1 and the terms of reference in the Annex 2 paragraphs 1C and D. Now on document CBD SBSTA-24/3/add1, we reiterate the many comments made during the peer review period and the difficulty for parties, especially developing countries, to implement the excessive number of proposed indicators. Finally, on document CBD/SBSTA/24/3/add2/rev1, we regret its late publication without translation into the 6 UN languages, which does not respect the rules of procedure and limits our possibility to exhaustively access this document before the meeting. And so we reserve the right to make additional comments later. Notwithstanding this, we wish to highlight that there are many reports which have established science's vision on the current biodiversity issues at a global level, and possible solutions to these issues. In this respect, we doubt that we need an additional scientific debate in this meeting about the validity of the proposed targets that parties have not been able to negotiate nor amend. Thus, we suggest that we should not devote too much time to this discussion so that we can focus on other relevant agenda items that were published correctly ahead of time and which need to be agreed upon by the parties in the SBSTA meeting in order to be adopted by COP15. And so once again, we very much want to participate actively in the discussions on this agenda item. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Argentina.
That document up to Rev 1 is already available in English, Spanish, French, and Chinese. So, the two languages remaining will be ready soon. This is for your information. Now I give the floor to the European Union, followed by Cuba and Belgium. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The EU is grateful to all who made it possible to hold the meetings starting today. We are determined to make progress on the road to Kunming. We support the statements made by Portugal, Sweden, and Spain. We need to agree on a core set of headline indicators to be used by all parties. We assessed the suitability of the proposed headline indicators, whether there are better candidates, and any gaps to be filled. We will share in writing a table that summarizes our preliminary assessment, because we believe it would be helpful as a basis for the conclusions of SBSTA. It is important to maximize coherence between the formulation of goals and targets and the suitable headline indicators. We will also submit a slightly revised proposed amendments to the recommendation in writing. Concerning the terms of reference for the Technical Expert Group on Indicators for the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we propose to establish an ad hoc technical expert group so that the subsequent COPs can decide to extend or adapt the mandate and membership to future needs. We appreciate the Add to Rev 1 document. We would like to provide additional advice to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group on a range of topics. We will submit a list in writing. Let me highlight the following. Science is clear. Achieving the 2050 vision requires a high ambition level. We note that document INF9 indicates a need to increase the area of natural ecosystems by 20%. We need to safeguard and retain not only areas that are intact and crucial for biodiversity, but also areas of high carbon storage, and there's a significant overlap between them. On restoration, Target 1 on restoration should cover restoration of degraded natural ecosystems and restoration of managed ecosystems into natural ecosystems. From the land degradation angle, some 1 to 2 billion hectares may need restoration by 2030. Within such a broad approach, science gives ground for a targeted approach for restoring 15% of converted lands in priority areas. Moreover, the targets should also address marine ecosystems. On invasive alien species, the target should take into account that it takes many years to know whether an alien species becomes invasive or not. Prevention is crucial. On target 11, science highlights the increasing importance of urban biodiversity. On goal C and target 12, the formulation of the goal and target on ABS poses considerable challenges, such as the identification of the baseline, measurability, the adequacy of indicators. Both monetary and non-monetary benefits matter. On target 16, we note the difficulties or impossibility to quantify a reduction of impacts. We doubt that target component 64 is suitable for this target. Let me conclude here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, European Union. Now I give the floor to Cuba, followed by Belgium and Armenia. Cuba tiene la palabra.
Cuba, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, we support what has been said by Argentina on behalf of GRULAC, and also the statements that we made in the last informal session. So we won't repeat what we've already said. We will try and focus on new elements. We are committed to the negotiations with this virtual approach as an exceptional way of doing things, but we'd like to say that this mode will not allow us to meet the same results in the efficient way. And we want to return to the normal mode as soon as possible in each of our countries. Secondly, as we said at the informal meeting, it is not feasible for developing countries to work with this monitoring framework with an excessive number of indicators, which is excessively complicated to implement. There are 3 different aspects. This is not favorable for developing countries because of the quantity and the quality of the indicators and the time that we have to actually implement these as set out in the monitoring framework. We were going to have a list of indicators after the COP15, but we have to look at the specific situations in each country to see how we can implement these. Then thirdly, we have to make special attention to scientific advice to actually support each proposed target. And we're worried to see that this information is insufficient for certain targets. So when we have the right discussion, we will express our considerations on these. And then fourthly, could you please try and speak closer to the mic? And we will have to look at the conditions on the international level because of the multifaceted crisis brought about by COVID-19. We have to also reflect on this, going beyond the negative impact on the economies of most of the developing countries. Of course, there needs to be international cooperation with solidarity and with clear, measurable roles to be played by developed countries and all the other actors and donors to help with biodiversity today. Thank you very much. And the interpreter apologizes, it was very hard to hear.
Followed by Armenia and Ethiopia. Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The statement Belgium made during the informal session of SBSTA is still valid. This one is on additional issues, and we will submit comments in writing to reflect the points made in that and the current statement. Belgium supports the goals and targets component acting as sub-targets. We support adopting the monitoring framework of the GBF as an annex to the COP decision. We support defining the full set of indicators at COP15 and the missing indicators to be developed by COP16 at the very latest. We also support having an ad hoc technical expert group on the monitoring framework, which should conclude its work preferably before COP16. It needs to be involved in keeping the monitoring framework under review. Belgium already highlighted gaps in the monitoring framework during the informal session, and additionally to those, we also want to flag we miss relevant indicators related to biodiversity and environmental impact assessments. Belgium supports a draft recommendation on the GBO5, including asking for a GBO6 report. Based on that too, Belgium supports that a rationale for the goals and targets should be developed for the adoption alongside the GBF at COP15. Belgium has amendments to propose to improve and reinforce Act 2 on the following issues. First, the ambition of the goals and targets, then correctly addressing managed, productive, extractive, and urban ecosystems in the goals and targets, goals and targets related to nature's contribution to people. The other means then additional financial resources regarding mobilizing resources. The other tools then spatial planning to address land use and land use change and retaining wilderness areas. The diversity of species within an ecosystem as well as their abundance. The other illegal or unsustainable components of harvesting, trade, and uses of wildlife, investing in all the wild species sustainable management, other ecotoxic chemical pollutants, climate change as a driver. We also think that we need to have all nature-based solution and ecosystem services related information under one section or target. The relevance of Article 14 of the Convention to achieve Target 13 and 16 should also be highlighted. Elements from the long-term approach on mainstreaming for business and economic sectors too, and also elements on externalities and telecoupling. The human rights approach, including the protection of environmental rights defenders, and finally, ways to address the indirect driver of human population dynamics. Belgium will submit our comments to the draft recommendation, its annex and its addenda in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Belgium. Now I give the floor to Armenia, followed by Ethiopia on the funds. Armenia, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for all the organizers of the conference. This year, Armenia also became a member of the High Ambitious Coalition, and Armenia is supporting the 30 by 30 target. But besides the establishing and area coverage, the protected area, Armenia is also is mentioning the importance of the quality of the area and the appropriate management of the protected area. And also the species existence index as an indicator, we should very carefully monitor the existence index and mention about the quality and the management. And also I would like to mention about the sustainable financing to make this happen, because especially for developing country, financial support is very important to become all this happen, and the capacity building is also very important. I mean, the ambitious plan to establish the protected area like 30% coverage is very good idea, but for making this happen and for reaching our good goal, important goal, I think we should consider very many things to become and make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Armenia. Now I'll give the floor to Ethiopia, followed by France and Bangladesh. Ethiopia, you have the floor. Seems some problems. Let's continue with France while we can try later with Ethiopia. France, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. We confirm that our intervention during the informal session remains valid, and we will send any changes in writing. Firstly, we regret that the revised document Add 2 was published with insufficient time to allow for an in-depth analysis by the parties and their experts. Nonetheless, we wish to emphasize several points relating to Add 2 and the version updated in light of the peer review. The scientists agree on the need for 30% protection of the land and sea areas. Certain studies, however, point to the idea that 50% protection by 2050 would enable protection of marine and terrestrial biodiversity while preserving ecosystem services. Therefore, the 30% level should not be perceived as a maximum target value. Moreover, the 30% must involve levels of protection that are adequate to deal with conservation issues. The concept of spatial planning in Target 1 must be better defined, given that it has a direct impact on the quantification of this target. We would like the document to reflect the fact that in situ conservation of genetic diversity of wild species can be aligned with Target 2 on protected areas, given that in situ genetic diversity could be one of the effectiveness indicators of these protected areas. France would like to emphasize the importance of developing indicators and indices such as SGAP, which would measure the gap between the current status of essential environmental functions and their sustainability. Indicators relating to imported impacts, such as imported deforestation, could also be included or developed. We support the role of the ad hoc working group on Article 8J and the new work program for identification and development of relevant indicators. The paragraphs of the related recommendation should be enhanced so as to emphasize the importance of traditional knowledge, particularly regarding the relationship with the land that Indigenous populations have. Their cultural, spiritual, economic, and political motivations support a type of management and/or governance that ensure the preservation and transfer of knowledge and contribute to conserving biodiversity on the lands where they live. In the proposed recommendation, CBD/SBSTTA-24/3, paragraph 3, we would like the indicators mentioned to be complementary indicators and not detailed indicators. In paragraph 4, France would like the proposed monitoring framework to be updated not only on the basis of SBSTTA comments, but also on the basis of SBI discussions on items 5, 9, and 11. The revised zero draft should be presented to the parties before, not during, the third meeting of the OEWG. Thank you.
With Ethiopia, if you can take the floor, please. Ethiopia. Go ahead. We cannot hear you. Your microphone is on. That's what I see on my screen. But unfortunately, we cannot hear you. So I asked Secretariat to contact Ethiopia. Meanwhile, we continue with Bangladesh, followed by Netherlands and Ecuador. Let's see if we can finish our list. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Bangladesh appreciates the working group and the Secretariat for draft development of the proposed indicators and monitoring approach for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. While we find there are indicators which have got country-specific implications, the main issue would be how easier these indicators are for reporting at an interval. Our previous experience says that there is huge gap in terms of understanding of the meaning of indicators to the policy level and that to the scientific and technical experts. Bangladesh recommends for the indicators those will be easier for assessment of the progress of the implementation as well as easily communicable to the policy level across the sectors. As a biodiverse country, Bangladesh should uphold the implementation of the convention and 3 objectives towards reaching the 2050 vision towards living in harmony with nature. We would provide our specific comments and inputs in written on the headline targets and indicators during the session. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bangladesh. Let's try for the third time with Ethiopia to see if the microphone works. Ethiopia. Seems we still having problems with Ethiopia. So let's continue with the list with Netherlands followed by Ecuador. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And our statement focuses on Addendum 2, as we have already commented the other elements of this agenda item. Distinguished delegates, the Netherlands is of the opinion that the revised document at 2/Ref provides valuable background information for a scientific and technical review of the draft goals and targets and is helpful to explain why a certain scope, set of components, quantitative elements and ambition level would contribute to meet the 2050 vision. The document was released late, which made timely preparations difficult. However, we think it's of great importance for Substat to fulfill its mandate and carry out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets and related indicators and baselines. We think both Addendum 2 and its revised version are limited to the scope of the updated Zero draft and therefore does not analyze if the proposed goals and targets are fully aligned with the CBD objectives and if the goals and targets components address the relevant challenges for biodiversity in a meaningful way. After studying the scientific information, it appears to us that the goals and target components not always form logic sets, and sometimes we found discrepancies and internal contradictions or unmeant perverse incentives or trade-offs between targets. Certain terms need a clearer definition in order for the target to be effective. All three components of biodiversity, ecosystems, species and genes, should be adequately covered by the goals and targets to track progress to 2050. In particular, the third component, genetic diversity, requires specific attention in goals, targets and targets components. Given the available scientific information, the Netherlands is of the opinion that special attention is needed to broaden the scope for targets and target components that will lead to increased mobilization of resources, especially from private sectors, as this is needed in order to get the 2050 vision within reach. We stand ready to elaborate further on specific goals, target and target components in dedicated contact groups. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Netherlands. Now I give the floor to Ecuador. Ecuador tiene la palabra.
Ecuador, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. Ecuador highlights the importance of having scientific and technical information that's adequate to support the review of the goals and targets and the reference values that have been put forward for post-2020 to ensure that these are clear and realistic and that can be implemented in this new normal after the pandemic. On this matter, Ecuador is worried about the implementation of the headline indicators under the current national conditions. And so we would like to have a more in-depth discussion in order to achieve overall implementation of the objectives of the Convention. We suggest we should take note of the monitoring framework approach and that they should line up with the other recommendations, the future work in the post-2020 working group. So for our country, the way in which several goals and targets are expressed at the moment could pose serious challenges in order to have effective assessment and monitoring and reporting. That is why we need to clarify the respective methodologies. Thus, it's necessary for the goals and the targets in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework should give adequate resources for implementation and the correct technical information and financial resources and capacity development and scientific cooperation and technology transfer from the developed countries to developing countries in compliance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and we need to have an adequate monitoring framework. That is why we support the setting up of an expert working group to deal with all of these aspects of the monitoring framework related to the post-2020 framework. And we will send specific comments in writing to the Secretariat by the corresponding electronic channels. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ecuador.
Finland. Uganda, you have the floor. We can hear you. So this,
Mr. Chairperson, Uganda aligns with the statement made by South Africa, speaking on behalf of the Africa Group. We wish to acknowledge and commend the working group co-chairs and the CBT Secretariat for the extensive effort in generating scientific and technical information to support the review of the updated goals and targets, as well as the indicators and baselines in the Zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In particular, we take note and appreciate the presentation of comprehensive technical analysis of the level of ambition, the quantitative elements of the proposed goals and targets, the linkages between targets and goals, as well as the articulation of possible actions that will be needed to achieve the 2050 vision and 2030 milestones. With that said, Mr. Chairperson, we wish to underscore the following as being of priority importance in the consideration of this agenda item. On the issue of headline indicators, we agree with the position of South Africa and propose that more work needs to be done, and especially in reducing the numbers to more manageable levels, particularly in the context of their availability, flexibility, and adequacy for national level application. With regard to options for baselines and reference periods, we wish to highlight the need to develop more meaningful, clearer, and consistent baselines, but also taking into consideration the unique national reporting situations and circumstances of parties. Furthermore, we wish to reiterate the significance of the discussions regarding digital sequence information, an issue that is of particular importance to us and which should therefore be further elaborated in the framework within the context of the current SBSTTA discussions. We wish further to call attention to the importance of mobilization, access to, and availability of resources to enable implementation of the framework, taking into account the current global challenges to recover from the economic and financial impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, Mr. Chairperson, we wish to underscore the need for SBSTTA to pay more attention to adequate and timely financial support for review and reporting on progress of implementation, including preparation of national reports. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Uganda. And now I give the floor to our last speaker for today. Finland, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, thank you. In addition to the points we raised during the informal SBSTTA meeting and the peer reviews, we would like to draw your attention to the following. The new goals and targets have to exceed the level of ambition of the strategic plan and the Aichi targets, as biodiversity has been decreasing during the period 2011 to 2020. The scope and level of ambition of a goal or target depends on the exact formulation. In many cases, the proposed goals and targets contain terms and concepts that have not been given a clear definition or have been defined differently in different contexts. Finland underlines the need to ensure that the direct and indirect drivers identified by IPBES are addressed, and that the anticipated actions lead to the transitions described by GBO5. We need to adopt a set of indicators to ensure parties and all relevant stakeholders accountability on the action targets to be reached by 2030 towards 2050. Finland supports the proposed structure of the monitoring framework, including headline, component, and complementary indicators. We will send in and give to the Secretariat our recommendations on Annex 1 and on the Annex 2 and the terms of reference. Indicators need to be closely interconnected with related goals and targets and reference periods. SBSTTA-24 Add 2 Rev 1 was released late and has not been analyzed due to lack of time. The rationale of the goals and targets supporting their common interpretation to ensure a coordinated and coherent implementation is really important, and the following gaps are inevitable. The marine environment is clearly disregarded and undervalued in the framework. This is recognized, but it is not explained, and there is no stated intention of addressing this problem. The rationale for Goal A does not include the ambition level needed, which cannot be lowered compared to the Aichi target on neither species nor ecosystems. Climate change as a driver of biodiversity loss is not addressed like all the other direct drivers of the biodiversity loss. Finland is the opinion that the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in areas beyond natural ecosystems, including agriculture, forest, freshwater, and urban environment, are important. Additionally, the other effective conservation measures needs to be clearly part of the framework, as it was in the Aichi targets. Managed ecosystems do provide important habitats and contribute to habitat connectivity for species, as well as being essential for ecosystem function and services, keeping in mind that biodiversity is an essential part of the solution and should be fully integrated and considered in the planning and implementation of actions. Finally, the proposals need to align with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and safeguard the right to free, prior and informed consent of Indigenous peoples regarding conservation, sustainable use, and other activities that take place on their territories. We will give you examples in Annex 3 on targets, including elaboration that need attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Finland. With this, we finish with speakers for today. We run out of time. Unfortunately, we cannot cover all requests from parties. So I have taken note of parties that remains on the queue. I will call you one by one tomorrow in the order that I have known. So we will try again with Ethiopia, followed by Denmark, Peru, Senegal, and Cambodia. Then my intention is to continue with major groups of observers and then to the establishment of contact groups. Please be aware that we have a very tight timeline for continue with the different agenda items, and I trust in your understanding on the best way to use our limited time. We heard already very good interventions, and most participants keep under the time allocated. We heard comments on, in general, for agenda item 3. As we should remind, we are using the basis of the 8.0 draft from co-chairs. We heard comments on the recommendations from document 3. We also hear comments on terms of reference for the expert group on indicators that will have a very important role. We heard comments also on GPO 5, also specific comments on Addendum 2 on the advice on what we currently have. Many comments on Addendum 1 on the monitoring framework. So all these pieces has to be together when we finish our deliberations to provide the advice to co-chairs, and in particular our advice on the scientific and technical elements on the draft we have, and also the proposal of the monitoring framework that needs a lot of work in terms of identifying headline indicators, discuss about baselines, also the need to develop new indicators. That's why my intention is the establishment of a contact group to deal in the next days during this week and so on. So with this, I would like to finish today's session and see you tomorrow to reconvene at 7 a.m. Montreal time to complete our reading of item 3 and the first reading of item 6 on Substa provisional agenda on marine and coastal biodiversity. Thank you very much to all for your cooperation, and have a good day, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.